So this is my second Hindu art podcast. Power and authority is also a central theme with Angkor Wat, the largest religious complex in the world, and our last work for today. Hindu art of the Gupta period spread from India southeast to Burma and Cambodia, where it developed a new and distinctively imperial character under the patronage of the Khmer or Cambodian monarchs. By the 12th century, these powerful monarchs, ruling out of Angkor, which is Khmer for city or capital, controlled an area that included portions of Thailand and Vietnam. As a king of the gods, the Khmer ruler was deified during his own lifetime. The kingdom of Angkor began to flourish in the 9th century along the northern shore of the Tonle Sap, the Great Lake which dominates the center of Cambodia. The Tonle Sap was to the Khmer what the Nile was to the ancient Egyptians. During the monsoon season, it quadruples in size. When the dry season returns, water flows out of the lake, leaving a fertile layer of mud. Long ago, the Khmer learned to divert the retreating water to increase rice production. As the population increased, the Khmer began to manage water even more intensively, not only for agriculture but also for religious purposes. They created broad moats around temples and built immense sacred lakes called bares, symbolic of the ocean surrounding the mythical Mount Meru, the home of the Hindu gods and the center of the universe. Water plays an important role in Hinduism as it does in many religions. Ritual bathing, especially in the holy Ganges, is a central purification ritual. In the 12th century, the capital of Angkor may have contained a population of 1 million. By comparison, Paris, one of the great cities of Europe at the time, had perhaps a population of 30,000. The royal palaces were built of perishable materials, and they've long since disappeared. But the temples were constructed of brick and stone, and many remain in a relatively good state of preservation. The largest of these temples is Angkor Wat, which means Temple of the Capital. It was built during the reign of King Suryavaram II in the first half of the 12th century. Its central spire is about 200 feet tall, and the moat surrounding the complex is over 2 miles in circumference. The broad moat and the outer wall symbolize the oceans and mountains ringing the edge of the world. Within, the 5 towers stand for the 5 peaks of Mount Meru, a Himalayan mountain that is the heart of the Hindu universe and the home of the Hindu gods. The temple is oriented so viewers passing through the western gate at sunrise on June 21st, the beginning of the Cambodian solar year, would see the sun rise directly over the central tower. This orientation may further tie the architecture and deified king with the cosmos, shades of Stonehenge. The temple's central icon depicted the king in the guise of Vishnu. An inner rectangle 3 stories high has 5 towered shrines and connecting colonnades that are accessible by stairways. At the focal point of this complex is the central temple, which again stands for Mount Meru. So the entire conception is a 2- and 3-dimensional mandala, or representation of the cosmos. Suryavaram II was unusual among Khmer kings in that he made Vishnu the focus of court religious life. Most Hindu temples were dedicated to Shiva, the god of all creation and destruction, and they faced east because Shiva ruled the eastern quadrant of the compass. Angkor Wat, however, faces west, probably because Vishnu ruled the western quadrant of the compass, but maybe also because the sun sets in the west, and this was also a royal tomb. So why did the king choose Vishnu instead of Shiva as his personal diva? Historians argue about this, but Suryavaram II was pretty clearly trying to establish himself as different from previous monarchs by promoting worship of a different god. One theory holds that the king chose Vishnu, the nourishing and preserving god, because of the instability that had confronted the Khmer regime at the beginning of his reign. Think of how Augustus represented himself as the preserver of peace and order after a time of chaos. The bas-relief in the south gallery of Angkor Wat that you see here is not one of your required works, but it shows the king seated on an elaborate wooden platform whose legs and railings are carved to resemble Naga snakes, and Vishnu is also often portrayed as resting on a snake. The numerous parasols are ancient emblems of royalty and high rank throughout the East. You have this map of Angkor Wat in your workbook, and I recommend you open it up and try to follow the virtual tour you're about to see. The guy's, I assume, Australian accent is a little thick, and he goes fast. Try to catch the stories, and especially the references to Mount Meru and the description of how the design of the complex reflects the Khmer Hindu view of creation and the structure of the universe. This is one of your required images, and you read the story, I hope. I also hope you'll have time to watch another children's cartoon version. But basically, this is a Hindu creation myth. Asuras, or demons, have gained control of the earth, so the devas, or gods, seek help from Vishnu. He advises them to form an alliance with the demons and to jointly churn the ocean for the nectar of immortality, or Amrita. Mount Mandara, one of the four spurs of Mount Meru, the world axis, was torn out to use as a churning stick. It was steadied at the bottom of the ocean by Vishnu in his avatar, that is, incarnation, as the tortoise Kurma. The gods and demons pulled back and forth on the snake's body, causing the mountain to rotate, which in turn churned the ocean. However, once the mountain was placed on the ocean, it began to sink. Vishnu, again in the form of a turtle, came to their rescue and supported the mountain on his back. When the Amrita appeared, the Devas and Asuras fought over its possession, although they'd originally agreed to share it equally. After many adventures, the Amrita was finally consumed by the gods, who were thus restored in strength. Good story. In the late 13th century, Angkor Wat was gradually moved from Hindu to Theravada Buddhist use, which continues to the present day. Angkor Wat is unusual among the Angkor temples in that although it was somewhat neglected after the 16th century, it was never completely abandoned, in part because its moat provided some protection from encroachment by the jungle. But, as you'll see here, the jungle won some of the rounds. Suryavarman II vanished around 1150, possibly murdered, and was likely buried in Angkor Wat. Toward the end of the century, a new king came to the throne, Jayavarman VII. He was a devout Buddhist mystic, yet he waged war constantly, expanded the empire, and exacted tribute from his defeated foes. So, something of a contradictory man. His statues portray him deep in meditation, smiling with half-closed eyes, detached from worldly affairs, and yet he embarked on vast building projects to his own glory that required the labor of hundreds of thousands, many of whom were slaves. He also kept hundreds of concubines. Just north of Angkor Wat, Jayavarman built a walled city of temples, pools, and terraces, Angkor Thom, or Great City. At the center, he raised his statue temple, the Bayon. If Angkor Wat is the classical Khmer ideal, the Bayon is its Gothic sibling, with crooked passageways, dark galleries, forests of stone pillars, and that statement will make more sense to you in a few weeks when you study Gothic art. The complex is a mix of Hindu and Buddhist imagery. After the king's death, the temple was modified and augmented by both Hindu and Buddhist kings, but eventually it fell into decline and was abandoned in the early 17th century. 54 towers rise from Angkor Thom's ramparts, each carved with 4 gigantic smiling faces. This is required work, and the College Board labeled these carved faces as Jayavarman represented as Buddha, but some scholars think they may be depictions of bodhisattvas or compassionate attendants of the Buddha. Back to the churning of the ocean milk and the children's cartoons. The whole 15-minute video, which starts at the beginning, is up on Moodle. This clip begins when the chief Vedic god Indra comes to Vishnu to ask for his help in getting rid of the demons who have taken over the god's land, Indra Loka. And now we move on to Buddhist art.